When I first drove through Oakwood Estates, I knew this was where I wanted to put down roots. The streets were wide and clean. The lawns were meticulously maintained. Children played freely on sidewalks while neighbors chatted across pristine white fences. It seemed like the suburban dream I had been searching for after years of cramped apartment living. I remember telling my sister on the phone, "This place is perfect, like something out of a magazine." The moving trucks had barely pulled away when a thick envelope appeared in my mailbox. Inside was a welcome packet from the Oakwood Estates Homeowners Association. 57 pages of rules, regulations, and bylaws, printed on heavy stock paper with the HOA logo embossed in gold. The document outlined everything from acceptable paint colors to lawn maintenance schedules to proper mailbox heights. I skimmed through it, slightly overwhelmed but reassured that these regulations were what kept the neighborhood looking so perfect. My first HOA meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday evening. I arrived early, eager to meet my new neighbors and become part of the community. The meeting was held in a small community center at the heart of the development. People filed in quietly, taking seats in neat rows of folding chairs. At precisely 7 o'clock, a woman with perfectly styled blonde hair and a crisp white blazer called the meeting to order. "For those who are new, I am Patricia Wellington, president of the Oakwood Estates HOA," she announced, scanning the room with sharp blue eyes that paused briefly on my face. "We maintain the highest standards here, and we expect all residents to do the same." Something in her tone made me sit up straighter, as if I were back in elementary school and had been caught passing notes. My first month passed without incident. I dutifully mowed my lawn every Saturday morning, kept my hedges trimmed to exactly 36 inches as specified in Section 4.3 of the HOA guidelines, and placed my trash bins exactly 5 feet from the curb on Wednesday evenings. Life was peaceful, if somewhat regimented. Then one Thursday morning, I stepped outside to retrieve my emptied trash bins and found nothing. Both my recycling and waste containers had vanished. I walked up and down the street, thinking perhaps the sanitation workers had misplaced them. No sign of my bins. Assuming they had been stolen or accidentally taken by the garbage truck, I called the city waste management department to report them missing. 3 days later, an official HOA violation notice appeared on my door. Violation: improper bin placement and failure to remove bins from curb within designated timeframe. Fine, $75. The notice made no sense. My bins had disappeared. How could I be fined for not removing them? I immediately called the number listed on the notice. "Oakwood Estates HOA, this is Patricia," answered the familiar voice from the meeting. "Hello, this is David from 427 Maple Lane. I received a violation notice about trash bins, but mine were actually stolen last week. I already reported it to the city," I explained politely. A cold laugh came through the phone. "Mr. Reynolds, your bins were not stolen. They were confiscated due to improper placement. Section 7.2 clearly states bins must be 5 feet from the curb, not 4 feet 8 inches as yours were. They will be returned once the fine is paid." I was stunned. "You measured my bin placement and took them without any notice?" I asked, trying to keep frustration from my voice. "Consider this a learning opportunity," Patricia replied curtly. "Oakwood Estates maintains its property values through strict adherence to standards. The fine can be paid online or at the next meeting." The line went dead before I could respond. That evening, while walking my dog through the neighborhood, I spotted my neighbor Sam watering his garden. I waved and approached, curious if he had experienced similar issues. "Oh, the trash bin thing." Sam lowered his voice despite us being alone on the street. "Patricia does that all the time. Most of us just pay the fines and try to stay off her radar. Last year, she confiscated the Rodriguez family's bins 3 times in 1 month. Is that even legal? I asked, genuinely confused. Sam shrugged. Probably not, but fighting the HOA means attorney fees, time, and becoming a target. Patricia has been president for 8 years running. Nobody runs against her anymore. As Sam continued speaking, I noticed his eyes dart nervously toward the street. Following his gaze, I saw Patricia Wellington driving slowly past in a white SUV, watching us with undisguised interest. She did not wave or acknowledge us, just maintained eye contact long enough to make her presence known before accelerating away. The next morning, a second violation notice was taped to my door. This one cited unauthorized gathering on lawn area after permitted hours. Another $75 fine. My brief conversation with Sam had apparently constituted an illegal gathering. As I stared at the paper in disbelief, I knew this was only the beginning of my troubles in what I had once thought was the perfect neighborhood. After paying the initial fines and retrieving my trash bins, I became meticulous about following every HOA rule to the letter. Each Wednesday evening, I placed my bins exactly 5 feet from the curb. I used a tape measure to verify the distance. I even took photos with the measurement clearly visible, documenting the precise placement. Despite my careful adherence to the rules, my bins disappeared again 2 weeks later. Another violation notice followed, this time claiming improper bin orientation. According to Patricia, the bins needed to face the street with handles toward the house, a detail nowhere to be found in the written guidelines I had received. Another $75 disappeared from my bank account. Another trip to retrieve my bins from the HOA storage facility, which I discovered was actually just Patricia Wellington's oversized garage. The pattern continued with maddening regularity. No matter how carefully I followed the written guidelines, Patricia found new, unwritten rules I had supposedly violated. My bins disappeared 4 times in 2 months. Each time, a new violation was cited. Each time, a new fine was levied. I began documenting everything obsessively. I set up a dedicated folder on my phone filled with dated photos of bin placement. I created spreadsheets tracking violations, payments, and communications. I even installed a small outdoor camera that captured my front curb area. One morning, while reviewing footage from my camera, I caught Patricia in the act. At 5:38 a.m., her white SUV pulled up in front of my house. She emerged wearing black athletic wear and gardening gloves, quickly loaded my bins into her vehicle, and drove away. The entire operation took less than 2 minutes. I watched the footage 3 times, scarcely believing the HOA president herself was personally removing my bins under cover of dawn. Armed with video evidence, I requested a meeting with Patricia. She agreed to see me at her home office the following afternoon. Her house was the largest on the block, a sprawling colonial with impeccable landscaping and a 3-car garage. She received me in a home office decorated with framed HOA certificates and community service awards. "I have video showing you taking my bins, Mrs. Wellington," I stated calmly, holding up my phone. "They were placed exactly according to HOA specifications. I measured carefully." Patricia did not even glance at my phone. "Mr. Reynolds, your camera is actually a violation of HOA privacy regulations. Section 12.4 prohibits surveillance equipment visible from common areas without prior board approval. That will be a $150 fine." My mouth opened and closed without words forming. She continued, "As for your bins, the board recently approved amendments to the waste management guidelines. All residents were notified via the community website." But there was no email, no letter, I began. It is your responsibility to stay informed of HOA developments, she interrupted. We cannot be expected to personally notify each resident of every update. I took a deep breath. Mrs. Wellington, I have paid over $300 in fines for violations that seem to change weekly. I am trying my best to comply with the rules. For a moment, her perfectly composed facade cracked, revealing something cold underneath. Mr. Reynolds, some people adapt well to community living. Others struggle with authority and shared standards. I suggest you decide which type of resident you intend to be. The message was clear: submit or suffer. The monthly HOA meeting provided no relief. I arrived prepared with my documentation and requested 5 minutes to address bin placement guidelines. Patricia allocated me precisely 2 minutes. As I began presenting my concerns and evidence, several board members studied their phones or shuffled papers. Patricia interrupted repeatedly with points of order and procedural objections. When I mentioned the video of her taking my bins, she cut me off entirely. We do not address individual enforcement actions in general meetings, she declared. You can submit a formal appeal in writing, which the board will review at our quarterly assessment meeting in 4 months. After the meeting, several neighbors approached me in the parking lot. They spoke in hushed tones, glancing around nervously. We have had similar issues, confided Maria Rodriguez. Last summer, Patricia took our garden gnomes because they exceeded the permitted lawn ornament height by 2 inches. Another neighbor, Tom Chen, nodded. She cited us for unauthorized wind chimes. We have been here 10 years and never knew wind chimes were restricted. Why does nobody challenge her? I asked. Maria sighed. 3 years ago, Robert Hoffman from Oak Street tried to run against her for HOA president. Within a month, he had received so many violations and fines that he actually sold his house and moved. Nobody has tried since. That weekend, while jogging through the neighborhood, I took a detour past Patricia's house. Her garage door was open as she unloaded groceries from her SUV. There, lined up against the back wall, were at least a dozen trash bins of various colors. I recognized mine immediately. I had marked them with small blue dots under the handles. Next to the bins were stacked lawn ornaments, wind chimes, holiday decorations, and even a child's basketball hoop. Patricia Wellington was not just enforcing rules, she was collecting trophies. With evidence mounting and my frustration reaching new heights, I decided to pursue official channels for resolution. I spent an entire weekend preparing a formal complaint to the HOA board. I printed color photos documenting my bin placement. I included screenshots from the HOA guidelines highlighting the actual written rules. I created a timeline of incidents with dates, times, and corresponding fines. I even included statements from neighbors who had witnessed Patricia taking my bins. The final document was 23 pages, professionally bound with a clear plastic cover and table of contents. I submitted this comprehensive complaint through the proper channels, requesting a formal review by the full board rather than just the president. According to HOA bylaws, the board had 14 days to acknowledge receipt and 30 days to provide a substantive response. I felt cautiously optimistic. Surely, when presented with such overwhelming evidence, reasonable people would recognize the abuse of power. On day 15, with no acknowledgement received, I emailed the HOA secretary, Martin Phillips. He responded promptly, claiming my complaint had never been received. I hand-delivered a second copy the same day, requesting a signed receipt. Martin appeared uncomfortable but complied, scribbling his signature on my receipt form while glancing nervously toward Patricia's office door. "I will make sure this gets proper attention," he whispered, quickly ushering me out. 3 days later, I received an unexpected call from another board member, Alina Johnson. She suggested meeting at the local coffee shop rather than the HOA office. Alina was a retired school principal who had served on the board for 5 years. When we met, she seemed genuinely concerned about my situation. "Your complaint is valid," she admitted quietly, stirring her coffee without making eye contact. "Several of us have been uncomfortable with Patricia's enforcement tactics for years, but you need to understand the reality of the situation." Alina explained that Patricia effectively controlled the board through a combination of procedural knowledge, personal alliances, and intimidation. Most board positions were filled by her friends or neighbors too intimidated to oppose her. Any challenge to her authority was methodically suppressed through committee reassignments, procedural obstacles, or personal targeting with violations. "We tried implementing a more balanced approach 2 years ago," Alina confided. "Within a month, Patricia had found bylaw violations that required 3 of us to recuse ourselves from key votes. The reform effort died in committee." I left that meeting deeply discouraged but still determined to work within the system. I continued attending every HOA meeting, raising questions about enforcement procedures, and building relationships with other concerned residents. I researched state laws governing homeowners associations and discovered several provisions that seemed to limit the HOA's authority to impose certain fines without proper notice. Meanwhile, Patricia escalated her campaign against me. Suddenly, violations appeared for issues that had never before been mentioned. My mailbox was apparently 2 inches taller than regulation height, despite being the builder-installed original. The native wildflowers I had planted in a small garden bed were deemed unapproved vegetation. The wreath on my front door exceeded the maximum diameter allowed for door decorations. Each violation brought a new fine, each more expensive than the last. When the holiday season arrived, I received a violation notice the very day after putting up modest decorations, lights outlining my roof, and a small inflatable snowman on my lawn. The citation referenced a holiday decorations addendum that limited light colors to white only and prohibited inflatable decorations entirely. When I searched the HOA website for this addendum, I found it had been uploaded the previous day. Desperate for professional advice, I reached out to my college friend Rachel, now a real estate attorney. She agreed to review my situation over lunch. "This is clearly selective enforcement and potentially illegal," Rachel said after examining my documentation. "The problem is proving discriminatory intent, which is difficult, and the cost of litigation would far exceed the fines you have paid." "So there is nothing I can do?" I asked, deflated. Rachel sighed. "You could sue, but expect to spend $10,000 minimum with no guarantee of success. HOAs are legally powerful entities. Courts generally defer to their authority unless there is clear evidence of discrimination based on protected class status." "What about the fact that she literally steals property from yards? That cannot be legal," I pressed. "The confiscation policy is technically outlined in your covenant, even if the implementation is questionable," Rachel replied. "You agreed to these terms when you purchased your home. It is a civil matter, not criminal theft." That evening, I sat on my front porch watching the neighborhood children play as the sun set. Across the street, my neighbor Sam was removing his holiday lights, likely having received the same violation notice I had. 2 houses down, the Rodriguez family's front yard was conspicuously bare of decorations. The sense of community I had initially been drawn to was nowhere to be found. Instead, there was a palpable atmosphere of surveillance and conformity. As Patricia's white SUV made its slow, deliberate evening patrol through the neighborhood, I realized conventional approaches had failed. The system was rigged. Official channels offered no recourse. Diplomatic efforts had been systematically blocked. If I wanted justice, if our neighborhood was ever going to feel like a true community, I would need to try something drastically different. By January, my financial situation had become concerning. Between HOA fines and repeatedly replacing confiscated items, I had spent over $1,200 dealing with Patricia's vendetta. My annual HOA dues of $850 were coming due, along with a newly announced special assessment of $300 for community entrance renovations that nobody had requested. The economic strain was significant, but the emotional cost was even greater. Neighbors who had initially been friendly now avoided eye contact when Patricia was nearby. Invitations to neighborhood gatherings dwindled. Parents steered their children away from my yard, as if rule violations might be contagious. The isolation grew more pronounced each week. I had become labeled as a troublemaker, the resident who questioned authority and disrupted the carefully maintained order of Oakwood Estates. The breaking point came on a sweltering Tuesday afternoon in late July. I returned home from work to find my trash bins missing again, despite meticulous placement according to every written guideline. This time, there was something different. A neighborhood-wide email had been sent while I was at the office. The subject line read, "Community Alert. Ongoing compliance issues at 427 Maple Lane." The message, sent from Patricia's official HOA email address to every household in Oakwood Estates, detailed my persistent noncompliance and disruptive influence on community standards. It warned neighbors about associating with problem residents who refused to follow simple rules, and suggested that property values could be affected by such deliberate patterns of nonconformity. My name was mentioned explicitly throughout. The email concluded by reminding residents that the HOA board reserved the right to pursue all available remedies, including property liens and legal action. I sat at my kitchen table, hands shaking with a combination of rage and humiliation. This public shamming crossed a line. She had moved beyond petty enforcement to outright defamation. I stepped outside, needing fresh air to clear my head, and found myself walking aimlessly through the neighborhood. Several neighbors quickly retreated indoors as I approached. A woman I had never met actually crossed the street to avoid passing me on the sidewalk. My wandering took me to the end of Oak Street, where construction was underway on a new driveway. Workers in hard hats operated a concrete mixer, pouring thick gray sludge into forms. I paused to watch, finding the methodical work somehow calming amid my emotional turmoil. The foreman noticed my interest and nodded a greeting. "New polymer blend," he remarked, gesturing to the concrete. "Sets faster, holds stronger. Once this stuff hardens, nothing short of a jackhammer is moving it." I watched as the viscous material flowed into place, solidifying into something permanent and immovable. In that moment, an idea took shape, absurd at first, then increasingly appealing as I considered it further. If Patricia wanted my trash bins so badly, perhaps I should make them truly special. That evening, I began researching concrete mixtures, weight calculations, and adhesion properties. I learned about quick-setting concrete varieties, weight-to-volume ratios, and proper mixing techniques. I calculated precisely how much weight would make the bins unmovable by a single person, yet still manageable for me to position with mechanical assistance. I sketched plans for internal reinforcement structures that would bond the concrete securely to the bins without changing their external appearance. The following Saturday, I visited a construction supply store 20 miles away where nobody would recognize me. I purchased 6 bags of quick-setting concrete mix, reinforcement wire, mixing tools, and heavy-duty gloves. The clerk asked if I was working on a home project. "Just securing some outdoor fixtures," I replied with a smile, having trouble keeping things in place. Back home, I transformed my garage into a workshop. I cleared space, laid down protective plastic sheeting, and arranged my materials with methodical precision. I measured water quantities exactly as specified for optimal strength. I created a wire frame inside each bin that would bond with the concrete and distribute weight evenly. I worked slowly and carefully, following each step with scientific accuracy. The concrete filled approximately the bottom third of each bin, enough to create immovable weight without being immediately obvious to casual observation. I added small amounts of black pigment to darken the concrete, making it less noticeable against the dark interior of the bins. Once poured, I allowed the mixture to cure for the full recommended time, occasionally misting the surface as directed to prevent cracking. When completed, each bin weighed approximately 112 pounds, heavy enough to resist casual removal, but still manageable for me using a hand truck and leverage. I tested moving them across my garage floor, making adjustments until I was satisfied with the balance between immobility and practicality. The exterior appearance remained unchanged, standard black waste bins with the city logo emblazoned on the side. Only the weight revealed their transformation. As I completed my work, a strange calm settled over me. For months, I had felt powerless against an arbitrary authority. Now, I had created something that would resist that power in the most literal sense. These were no longer just trash bins. They were a physical manifestation of my refusal to be bullied further. The concrete was my line in the sand, hardened into something Patricia Wellington could not simply carry away in the early morning hours. I wheeled the reinforced bins into a corner of my garage and covered them with a tarp. The waste collection day was still 4 days away. I needed to plan the deployment carefully, considering camera placement, timing, and neighborhood activity patterns. This would be my one opportunity to make a statement that could not be ignored or erased by HOA procedural maneuvers. For the first time in months, I slept soundly, no longer feeling like a helpless victim in my own neighborhood. Wednesday arrived with perfect weather conditions for my plan: clear skies, mild temperature, and a gentle breeze. I had requested the day off work, knowing I needed to execute every step with precision. The trash collection was scheduled for Thursday morning, which meant bins could legally be placed at the curb after 6:00 p.m. on Wednesday, according to HOA regulations. I intended to follow those regulations to the letter. My preparations began at dawn. I positioned 3 small cameras disguised within landscape features around my front yard. One was hidden in a decorative bird feeder with a clear view of the curb. Another was concealed within a solar garden light, angled toward the street. The third was tucked behind a small American flag mounted beside my mailbox. Each camera offered a different perspective, ensuring complete coverage of the area where my bins would be placed. At 4:00 p.m., I began the delicate process of moving my concrete-filled bins from the garage to staging positions near my front door. Using a sturdy hand truck, I carefully rolled each bin into place, positioning them for quick deployment later. The weight made them challenging to maneuver, but the reinforced bottom structure distributed the load effectively, preventing damage to my driveway. While waiting for the official 6:00 p.m. placement time, I reviewed the HOA guidelines once more. Section 7.2 stated, "Waste receptacles must be placed no less than 5 feet from the curb, with handles facing away from street view. Receptacles may not be placed before 6:00 p.m. on the day preceding scheduled collection and must be removed by 8:00 p.m. on collection day." At precisely 5:15 7:58 p.m., I positioned my digital camera on a tripod and set it to record. I wanted documentation of my exact compliance with HOA regulations. At 6:00 p.m. exactly, I began moving the bins into position. Using the hand truck, I carefully transported each bin to the curb area. I placed a measuring tape visibly on the ground, showing exactly 5 feet from the curb to the front of each bin. I positioned the bins with handles facing my house as required. I even used a level to ensure they stood perfectly upright. The entire process took approximately 15 minutes, during which several neighbors walked or drove past, watching with curious expressions. Once the bins were perfectly positioned, I took photographs from multiple angles, documenting their placement relative to the curb, the time stamps on my phone clearly visible in each image. I then retreated to my home but remained vigilant, monitoring the hidden cameras through my laptop. Based on previous patterns, I anticipated Patricia would make her move either very early the following morning or possibly even that evening. I did not have to wait long. At 7:32 p.m., a white SUV drove slowly past my house, making 2 complete circuits of the block. At 7:47 p.m., the same vehicle parked 3 houses down. Through my window, I watched as Patricia Wellington emerged, dressed in dark athletic wear and carrying what appeared to be a small measuring tool. She walked purposefully toward my property, scanning neighboring houses as she approached. Patricia began by examining my bins from a distance, circling them with a puzzled expression. She pulled out a measuring tape and checked the distance from the curb, frowning when she found it precisely 5 feet. She checked the orientation of the handles, finding them correctly positioned away from the street. After several minutes of inspection, apparently frustrated at finding no violations, she finally reached for the handle of the first bin. The moment her hand gripped the handle, her body jerked with surprise. She pulled again, harder this time, visibly confused when the bin did not budge. She planted her feet more firmly and put her full weight into pulling, her face reddening with exertion. The bin remained immovable, anchored in place by over 100 pounds of concrete. Patricia released the handle and stepped back, looking around nervously to see if anyone was watching. She then attempted to push the bin from the side, again meeting immovable resistance. After several more failed attempts, she pulled out her phone and made a call, speaking urgently while gesturing at my bins. 20 minutes later, a black pickup truck pulled up beside her SUV. Her husband, Robert Wellington, emerged looking annoyed. Patricia pointed emphatically at my bins. Robert approached confidently, clearly believing his superior strength would solve the problem. He gripped the handle of the first bin and pulled. His confident expression quickly transformed to confusion. He repositioned and tried again, straining visibly. The bin remained firmly in place. The couple conferred briefly before calling a third person, Jeffrey Mills, the HOA treasurer who lived nearby. Soon all 3 adults were taking turns attempting to move my immovable bins, their frustration growing with each failed attempt. They tried pulling together, lifting from the bottom, and even attempting to tip the bins sideways. Nothing worked. Throughout this spectacle, I remained inside my home, recording everything through my hidden cameras. After nearly 40 minutes of futile efforts, the group retreated to the sidewalk for an intense discussion. Patricia gestured angrily toward my house while Robert shook his head. Jeffrey appeared to be trying to calm the situation, though he kept looking toward my bins with baffled curiosity. Finally, Patricia stormed up to my front door and rang the bell repeatedly. I waited a moment before answering, greeting her with calm politeness. "Good evening, Mrs. Wellington. Is there a problem?" "What have you done to those bins?" she demanded, her voice tight with anger. "I placed them according to HOA regulations," I replied calmly. 5 feet from the curb, handles facing away from the street after 6:00 p.m. as permitted. "They cannot be moved," she exclaimed. I adopted a puzzled expression. "Really? How strange. I managed to place them there without any trouble." Patricia's face flushed deeper. "You have intentionally tampered with HOA-regulated waste receptacles. This is vandalism of community property." "Actually, the bins belong to the City Waste Management Department, not the HOA," I corrected gently. "And I have not damaged them in any way. They are fully functional as waste receptacles." Unable to formulate an immediate response, Patricia turned on her heel and rejoined her husband and Jeffrey on the sidewalk. Their heated discussion continued for several more minutes before all three departed in their separate vehicles. As they pulled away, Patricia was already on her phone, her gestures animated and urgent. Within an hour, a community-wide email blast announced an emergency HOA meeting for the following evening to address acts of vandalism and obstruction of HOA enforcement procedures. The meeting was mandatory for all residents, with fines for non-attendance. The neighborhood was about to witness the next phase of our conflict, and for once, I felt prepared. The community center was packed beyond capacity for the emergency meeting. Residents who typically skipped HOA gatherings showed up in unprecedented numbers, curious about the vague but dramatic email summons. Extra chairs were brought in from storage rooms. People stood along the walls when seating ran out. The energy in the room was electric, a mixture of confusion, anticipation, and suppressed excitement. Patricia Wellington took her place at the podium promptly at 7:00 p.m., flanked by the full HOA board. She wore a formal navy blazer and pearl necklace, projecting authority and seriousness. The room fell silent as she adjusted the microphone and cleared her throat. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," she began, her voice crisp and official. "We face an unprecedented situation that threatens the integrity of our enforcement procedures, and by extension, our property values and community standards." For the next 12 minutes, Patricia detailed what she described as a deliberate act of vandalism and booby-trapping that had occurred on my property. She explained how waste receptacles had been maliciously modified to prevent routine enforcement of community guidelines. She never mentioned me by name but repeatedly gestured toward where I sat in the third row. She framed the situation as an attack on the community itself, suggesting that such behavior threatened the very foundation of our neighborhood stability. "If residents are permitted to obstruct enforcement procedures, chaos will follow," she declared dramatically. "Today it is immovable trash bins. Tomorrow, who knows what other rebellious acts might be inspired. Our community standards, the very reason many of you chose Oakwood Estates, will erode beyond recognition." When Patricia finished her presentation, she called for an immediate vote on a proposed emergency bylaw amendment prohibiting modification of any exterior items subject to HOA regulations, with significant penalties, including daily fines of $200 until compliance was achieved. Before the vote could proceed, I raised my hand. Patricia attempted to ignore me, but several neighbors pointed in my direction, and the room began to murmur. Finally, Martin Phillips, the HOA secretary, leaned over and whispered something to Patricia. With visible reluctance, she acknowledged me. "The resident from 427 Maple Lane wishes to speak. You have 2 minutes." I walked calmly to the front of the room, carrying my laptop. "Thank you, Mrs. Wellington. Before we vote on new penalties, I believe everyone should understand exactly what has been happening in our neighborhood." I connected my laptop to the projector system and opened a carefully prepared presentation. For the past 7 months, I have documented a pattern of selective enforcement and personal harassment disguised as HOA regulation. The first slide appeared, a collection of photos showing my trash bins placed exactly according to HOA specifications, with measuring tape clearly visible. These bins were correctly placed according to every written guideline, yet they disappeared repeatedly. I advanced to the next slide, security footage showing Patricia taking my bins at 5:38 a.m. The timestamp was clearly visible. Audible gasps came from several areas of the room. "This is not enforcement. This is theft of personal property," I stated firmly. I continued through my presentation, showing evidence of changing rules, selective enforcement, and retaliatory actions. I displayed the defamatory community email Patricia had sent about me. I shared documentation of inconsistent rule application across different properties. Finally, I played a compilation of footage from the previous evening. Patricia, her husband, and Jeffrey struggling comically with my concrete-filled bins. Nervous laughter rippled through the audience. "I did not modify my bins to obstruct enforcement," I explained. "I modified them to prevent theft. There is no HOA regulation specifying how much a trash bin should weigh. There is, however, a state law against taking property from private residences without permission." As I returned to my seat, the room erupted in conversation. Patricia banged her gavel repeatedly, trying to restore order. Before she could regain control, Maria Rodriguez stood up from her seat near the back. "Last summer, Patricia confiscated our garden gnomes because she said they were 2 inches too tall," Maria announced loudly. "We never got them back. They are probably still in her garage with everyone else's things." This opened the floodgates. Suddenly, residents were standing up throughout the room, sharing their experiences of seemingly arbitrary rule enforcement and confiscated property. Tom Chen described how his wind chimes disappeared. The Williams family detailed violations for a basketball hoop that had been installed with prior written approval. An elderly resident tearfully described being fined for having a medical ramp installed while recovering from surgery. As stories multiplied, the mood in the room transformed. Years of suppressed frustration found release. Patricia continued banging her gavel ineffectively, her face growing increasingly pale. Board members exchanged uncomfortable glances. Jeffrey Mills actually slid his chair slightly away from Patricia, creating physical distance from the unfolding disaster. "Order, this is not an open forum for complaints," Patricia finally shouted into the microphone. "We are here to vote on the emergency amendment regarding receptacle modifications." Eleanor Johnson, the board member who had previously met with me privately, stood up. "I move that we table the proposed amendment and instead form an independent committee to investigate these allegations of selective enforcement and confiscation of property." Martin Phillips quickly seconded the motion. "And I further move that we conduct an inventory of all items currently stored in HOA facilities, including any items in the possession of board members related to enforcement actions." Patricia sputtered in protest, but procedure was now working against her. A vote was called. The motion passed overwhelmingly, with only Patricia and one loyal board member opposed. A follow-up motion called for a special election to review all board positions, scheduled for the following month. This too passed by a similar margin. As the meeting adjourned, Patricia remained at the podium, staring at the empty chairs with an expression of stunned disbelief. Her carefully constructed system of control had collapsed in a single evening. Residents clustered in animated conversation, many approaching me to share their own stories or offer support. Several people took photos of my presentation slides, which remained projected on the screen. Outside the community center, a strange celebratory atmosphere had developed. Neighbors who had previously avoided eye contact now introduced themselves and exchanged phone numbers. Impromptu plans formed for a community cookout that weekend. Someone suggested creating a resident-led committee to review and simplify HOA guidelines. As I walked home through the warm evening air, neighbors called out greetings from porches and driveways. For the first time since moving to Oakwood Estates, I felt part of a genuine community. My concrete-filled trash bins had done more than prevent theft. They had broken the foundation of fear that had kept the neighborhood divided and controlled for years.